Elizabeth had been waiting impatiently for a letter from Jane. Finally, 2 letters arrived on the same day. While her aunt and uncle were out, Elizabeth opened the first one. It read, "Dearest Lizzie, something very serious has happened. Please don't be alarmed, we are all well. What I have to tell you concerns poor Lydia. An express letter came last night from Colonel Forster. Lydia has eloped with one of his officers, Wickham. I'm sorry for Lydia. But at least he isn't marrying her out of greed. He must know that father can give her nothing. I must go, for I cannot leave poor mother alone for long." The next letter had been written a day later. It read, "Dearest Lizzie, I hardly know what to write. We're not certain that Lydia and Wickham have been married at all. A friend of Wickham's has confessed to Colonel Forster that Wickham had no intention of marrying her. Father and mother fear the worst. I can hardly believe it, but Colonel Forster says Wickham is not a man to be trusted. As far as we can tell, they went to London. Colonel Forster and father are in London now, trying to find them. I hope our uncle will be kind enough to join them. I beg you, dearest Lizzie, to return home as soon as possible." When she finished reading, Elizabeth started from her seat. "Oh, where's my uncle?" she cried. As she reached the door, it was opened by a servant. Mr. Darcy stepped inside. Her pale face shocked him. "Good God! What's the matter?" he cried out. "I've had some dreadful news from home," she said before bursting into tears. For a few minutes she couldn't speak. Finally, she went on. "This news cannot be kept secret from anyone. My youngest sister, Lydia, has run off with Mr. Wickham. You know him too well to doubt the rest." Darcy stared in astonishment. "I'm grieved, shocked," he exclaimed. "What has been done to find her?" "My father has gone to London," she said. "Jane has written to ask our uncle's help. But I have no hope. What can we do with a man like Wickham? It is horrible." Darcy hardly seemed to hear her. He walked up and down the room. A gloomy expression was on his face. Now Elizabeth understood her own feelings. Now, when it was hopeless, she realized how much she could have loved him. Soon after Darcy said goodbye, her aunt and uncle returned. Trembling, Elizabeth read them the letters. Her uncle quickly offered to help. An hour later, they were seated in the carriage, headed toward the Bennets' house. As they rode, Elizabeth's thoughts turned to Lydia again and again. She'd never noticed that Lydia had preferred Wickham to any of the other officers. Sometimes one officer, sometimes another had been her favorite. It seemed that poor Lydia was eager to attach herself to anybody. Arriving at home, Elizabeth found her mother in bed. Mrs. Bennet greeted them with noisy tears. She blamed everyone but herself for Lydia's fate. "I am sure the Forsters neglected poor Lydia," she said. "She's not the kind of child to do such a thing. Poor girl. Oh, I have such tremblings all over me. And pains in my head. I cannot rest by night or day. And now Mr. Bennet's gone away. I know that he will fight Wickham. If he's killed, what will become of us?" Everyone tried to calm her down. Mr. Gardiner assured her that he would travel to London the very next day. Later, Jane showed Elizabeth the letter Lydia had written to Mrs. Forster. It read, "You'll laugh tomorrow when you know where I've gone. I cannot help laughing myself to imagine your surprise tomorrow morning. I'm going to be married. And if you cannot guess who I'm marrying, I shall think you a simpleton. If you don't want to, you needn't send word to my family. It will be an even bigger surprise when I write to them, and sign my name Lydia Wickham." "Oh, thoughtless, thoughtless Lydia!" Elizabeth cried out. "But at least this shows she was serious about getting married. Our poor father. How he must have felt. I never saw anyone look quite so shocked," Jane said. For 10 minutes or so, he couldn't speak a word. They waited anxiously for a letter from Mr. Bennet. Instead, a letter addressed to him arrived from Mr. Collins. Jane had received directions to open all of her father's mail. She opened the letter and read, "I feel I must comfort your family during this sad time. Your distress must be of the worst kind, for time will not heal it. Indeed, the death of your daughter would be a blessing compared to this scandal. It must be especially painful for you, since it is clear you've been too lenient with her. All of us, including Lady Catherine, agree that you deserve our pity. But such a false step by one daughter will hurt all of them. For who would connect themselves with such a family? Let me advise you, dear sir, to cut off all your affection for this unworthy child." The next letter they received was from Mr. Gardner. He told them Wickham had left Brighton because of his many gambling debts. He owed more than £1,000. Mr. Gardner then added that Lydia's father had become discouraged in his search. He'd be arriving home soon. Mrs. Bennet was not so concerned for her husband's safety as before. "What?" she cried. "Coming home without Lydia? Who will fight Wickham and force him to marry her?" Mr. Bennet was in a dark mood when he returned home. Elizabeth tried to comfort him, but he said, "For once in my life, Lizzie, let me feel how much I'm to blame. But I'm not afraid of being overpowered with my guilt. It will pass away soon enough.